Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist. Join me as I seek out the small incremental changes being applied in other industries that we can learn from and that can be applied in healthcare. Can these changes bring immediate value, but also add up to the big improvements and revolution we need in healthcare? Come along with me to explore the possibilities. My innovative guests from around the globe have used small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot.
And today I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Craig Joseph. As I am each and every month, he's the Chief Medical Officer of Nordic Consulting Partners, and we're talking about news you can use. Craig, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me again.
So unfortunately, we're still needing to talk about COVID-19, and I think we're seeing a rise in cases. Obviously, the Delta variant is playing a big impact, and a change back to the policy of masking. But the question is, where does this end? What's the end point for this?
Well, I actually know the answer, Nick, but I don't want to share it with you right now. I'm writing a book, and when my book is done, everyone can go out and read it. But
I just think your book will never be finished on this particular point, but go on.
All right. If you're going to push me, I'm not writing a book about COVID-19. I don't know where it ends. It's very confusing. I thought I understood what was happening and what was, a path forward. And now, there's just a significant chunk of the U.S. population that is resistant to or will never get vaccinated against COVID-19. And as a significant reason, because of that, we're seeing numbers rise again, and it's clearly it's not everywhere. It's where people who are less vaccinated, for either because they don't have access to the vaccine or because they choose not to get the vaccine. And so, as you mentioned, LA County and other areas are now reverting and putting back in restrictions. So far, I haven't heard about anything being closed. But certainly indoor use of masks is back in Los Angeles and other areas. And, the question is for how long is this going to go on for? Not meaning this one masking episode, but are we just going to go from, variant of concern to a new variant of concern that hasn't spread yet until it's kind of burned through the population?
And I can predict the next name of the variant of concern. It will be E echo or E epsilon, depending on which version of the phonetic alphabet that they decide to use. So
that is amazing. Your powers of perception are great.
I'm going to be proven wrong because there's probably going to be a jump there or something. But
no, I think it's going to be. I think they're using Greek letters, right? So it will be probably be epsilon. And
one of my proudest moments was to learn that phonetic alphabet because I was heavily into flying, and I overheard it one day and thought, wow, that's really cool. I must learn it. So now I use it all the time just to impress people.
I also use it, and for a similar reason, learned the Greek alphabet because I pledged a fraternity in college and was forced to. So obviously you did it for good reasons. I did it for bad reasons. But we're at the same point, Nick, that we're at the point where we know what comes after Delta. That's what the listeners wanted to know about, and it's epsilon. But there will be an epsilon, and there'll be more after that. And the reason you have variants is because you still have viruses. And from a scientific standpoint, the reason, at least in the U.S. and most areas, that we still have viruses is because people are not getting vaccinated quickly. Or choosing not to get vaccinated at all.
Let's be categoric about this. If you haven't been vaccinated and this virus is still circulating, you are essentially a variant factory. There's been a lot of commentary on that because the only way this virus creates variants is by replicating. And if we suppress the replication and suppress this virus so that it disappears as it should, then these variants, whilst they could still occur, at least I'm not aware of a reservoir of COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2, appropriately called, in another animal species or in another pool for it to sort of hide away, as seems to happen with Ebola, for example, because it sort of disappears and then reemerges. So if we suppress it, then we suppress all of the potential emergence and it disappears. So it goes from being a pandemic to nothing. But what we seem to be on course for is, no, let's just allow it to sort of muddle along. And every time it replicates, it has an opportunity. That's what it does. I mean, I don't think it's not a thoughtful process, to be clear. It's just a piece of the science. And the replication, it's a little bit like copying down letters from, when you had to copy down from the blackboard in the old days. Gosh, I'm really dating myself by saying that. You would make mistakes. The more you did it, the more opportunities for mistakes. And that's what creates them. Not all of them become concerns, variants of concern. Some just disappear because they're no good. But the more you have, the more chance there is. So ultimately, unless we get this vaccination thing right, and not just in the US, let's be clear, but worldwide, we are essentially on a path that sounds like we're going to keep going in and out of this methodology, you think?
I don't know. I think everything you just said was right. And, if you get COVID and it replicates inside you and it makes a mutation and it becomes one of those, that mutation, again, most of the time mutations are very bad for the virus. But every now and then it does something that gives it superpowers. And that's what we have with this Delta variant. If everyone around you is immune, and typically that's because they've been vaccinated, then that mutation goes nowhere because it stays with you. And as you get better, hopefully, it's done. As you point out, it's really not, this is not an individual problem, unfortunately. What you do affects those around you, and what they do affects you. And it does seem to be like this is going to be going on at this rate for some time. And the question has always been, will there need to be a booster? And people were asking that from the beginning, long before Delta variant was even a thing. And it seems like that might be the case so far. The Delta variant, and again, there are other variants, of course, but that's the big one, does seem to be responsive to the vaccine, meaning the vaccine does protect you. It may not protect you from getting the disease at all, right? So let's emphasize, by getting vaccinated doesn't mean you're totally on the clear. It actually doesn't promise you anything. What it does tell you is you're significantly less likely to die or be hospitalized because of COVID-19. And that's still the case for the Delta variant. However, the worry is about the Epsilon variant that doesn't yet exist, right? Or that we haven't identified yet. And will that respond as well to the vaccine? And if not, then how do we get a booster? And let's hope that we can, as quickly as we came out with these vaccines, that we can find another one that works against that other SARS-CoV-2 variant. It's just now looking like it's just going in circles. It's a cycle. And the question is, how do you break that cycle if lots of people are not going to get vaccinated? And I think, again, the science shows that it's not the same. There are some who say, well, if I get the disease, that's my protection's great. Well, that might be true. The science, I think, is showing that the vaccines are giving better protection in general than getting the disease itself. So, and you don't want the disease. It's not something. Well, most people do fine and don't die. Well over 600,000 have in the United States alone, and that's with one of the best healthcare systems in the world, theoretically.
Yeah. So I think the overwhelming point here is that we have to find ways to help people understand that these vaccines are extraordinarily safe. Let's be clear. Is it possible to say that there is no risk? Nope. We've discussed that at length, I think, extensively. It's impossible to do that even with something that is zero risk, because we can never really be sure. But the incidence of any problems is infinitesimally smaller than the risk of getting the disease and not just dying from it, but also suffering from what is termed long COVID. I think they tried to rename it. I'm guessing that's not been successful because I certainly haven't persisted with whatever the new naming convention was. And that's a significant long-term effect. I've certainly heard of extensive numbers of people. So that's not what you want. And if nothing else, you don't want to give this to your grandparents, your parents, even to the younger generation. So why be a spreader when you can be a preventer? I don't know how else to say it. The history, the science, 100 years plus of science that has gone into making this vaccine safe and effective is second to none. Can we be certain of anything? No, but everything that we know tells us that it's safe. And for those of you that haven't, I would implore you to get it. And if you don't want to get it, perhaps you can help us understand why that's the case so that maybe we can try and explain some of the reasons. We're just not very good at assessing risk, I think, is part of the problem. So, we'll get into a car where you're at much greater risk, but might be fearful of flying, which is a much safer activity, as an example. So
Yep.
That's all I can say on this topic. So let's move on. I think we're going to see, well, maybe not see, but the extension of the public health emergency that was declared that essentially allowed for telehealth to explode onto the scene. It's been 2 years away for the last 10 years, and it was still 2 years away, right up until the point that everybody said, oh my God, it works, we should use this. But maybe things are going to change. What are your feelings about that?
I am quite pessimistic. So I'm hoping that you're going to...
Yeah.
Well, I so as we know, it wasn't like no one knew how to do telehealth, right? We've had this thing called phones. We've had phones. So we've had the technology to be able to do a certain kind of visit over the phone. And we've even in the last 5 years, easily, even longer, had the ability to do an online visit where you could look at your doctor or the clinician and talk back and forth. The reason it never picked up, that we never really went anywhere within the US, is because most payers, including the government, didn't want to pay for it because they were questioning whether or not that was a quality medicine and how do you root out abuse and lots of other reasons why people questioned it. Well, and then the pandemic happened and it was that or nothing, right? You either had an online visit, a telehealth visit, or you didn't have anything because doctors' offices were by and large closed. And so permission was given because of the pandemic and payers paid for it. And it turned out to be incredibly effective. And not for everything. Of course, you can't do a proper physical exam. And there are other reasons why you'd want to see your doctor in person. But for a big chunk of visits, no need to go in. And now I'm just seeing as one by one payers saying, oh, well, as this national disaster recedes and the legal definition from state by state is changing and saying, okay, we don't have this pandemic anymore. We still have it, but the emergency is done. Everything's going back. And payers are like making the same statements. Again, I'm stereotyping, but these are what I'm hearing. Like, well, there might be a lot of abuse, and well, the quality might not be there, and sometimes citing the exceptions instead of the rules. Right? There are always going to be people who are abusing the system, but I just don't feel the love. I don't feel the love from the government and the companies that pay for telehealth. I do think there's lots of people who don't want to go back. I mean, I, for one, have had both in-person and telehealth visits with my doctor, and I think it's great. And there are times where I want to be there, and there are times where I need to be there to talk with my doctor. But other times where, especially follow-up or minor things, like I just need some advice. You don't need to poke and prod me to give me that advice. So anyway, I don't have a lot of strong evidence, but my spidey sensors are not telling me to feel good. What about you, Nick? Am I completely off here?
Well, for those of you just joining, I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and today I'm talking to Dr. Craig Joseph, the Chief Medical Officer for Nordic Consulting. He was just identifying as Spider-Man, just right there. His spidey sense was going off with telehealth, and my glass is always half full. I'm well known for this. It's half full of whiskey and half full of air, and I'm delighted by that particular view of the world. I agree there's a lot of pushback, but what I'm banking on is an overwhelming majority of people who are going, no, I'm not accepting this. This is ridiculous. Why should I haul all the way in, spend 40 minutes, take a day off work or half a day or whatever it is to have to drive in to see somebody, sit in a waiting room where I stand the risk of, all sorts of potential negative consequences by mixing and matching in those circumstances, unless I really have to, for the purposes of a follow-up visit or a simple visit where somebody needed to talk to me, I had some advice, and we moved on. This just, for me, is plain unacceptable, and I do not think you can put that particular genie back in the bottle. And I think the onus is on us as clinicians, as healthcare providers, as patients, to stand up and say, no, I'm not willing to accept this. This is my driver. But ultimately, it's the purse strings that control this. So how do you influence those folks to allow them so that they see the value? I mean, this has to save money in some respects, doesn't it? I mean, isn't there some economic validity to this that we can still do? They save money by doing it.
Well, who saves money? That's
the payers, ultimately, because they're the ones that are saying, I'm going to pay for this. They're just paying less. And I know there's a lot of pushback on that because it still demands the same amount of medical decision making. Should it be at the same price?
Right. See, that's where, don't get me wrong. I think everything you said is right, and that patients are demanding and providers are demanding that we be able to continue to do this. But, this is how I just see it kind of potentially eroding. Like, well, we used to pay you, I'm just going to make up a number, $100 for an office visit. We, being the big insurance company or the government, we would pay you $100 because we assumed, like, you have to pay rent and you have to have a nurse and you have to have a front office person, and all of that kind of got into what we thought the value was. Well, now it's just you, doctor, and a computer. And we don't really.
But I need an IT person to support and deliver against that. I still need my nurse because I need somebody to help me with the pre and post and the follow-up and the documentation. All of that stuff that still took place in the office still needs to take place. And I still need a front office person because they've got to do all the coordination to make sure those appointments are set up, that if things are running late, that they can schedule. Yes, you can use some technology, but you still need people behind that. Do I need the physical office space? Well, that depends on whether I can do it in my office space, and I'm still seeing patients, so I still need to see them. So I'm going to say, no, that's not true.
I am going to continue to be upset with you for trying to use logic and common sense in dealing with arguments I make on behalf of big payers. So again, all of that makes sense, and I hope that your calm demeanor and sense of normalcy and just common sense makes the day, holds the day. But I'm not confident that it always works that way when we're talking about some of these things. So interesting to talk about. This is one of those things where I hope I'm wrong.
Well, let's watch this space. So telehealth and the pandemic health emergency may or may not change things. We've got to stay on top of it. Last few minutes, I think we both saw the article in JAMA that talked about physician language, that did a survey of, the way that we write notes. I certainly read it with tremendous interest because I looked at the example specifically. This was talking to stigmatizing language in the patient medical records. And I'll be honest here, I looked at some of those things and thought, yeah, I have absolutely used those terms, I'll say not with intent at stigmatizing. Some of the specific examples that they used, specifically on the negative, reports, denies, even what they described as implying disbelief. Patient insists that the pain is, and I'm thinking, gosh, I used all of those terms, and I struggled with this because I wasn't sure how to sort of rectify. And they had the other side. What was your view?
Well, first of all, I think this is very helpful because I did not know you were a horrible person. And
thanks very much.
A horrible doctor, but now it's been confirmed. So by you, actually, not by other people. No, seriously, this is kind of the language that we were brought up with, right? When we went through medical school and residency and all that training, these are the words. All industries, including healthcare, I think, have words and that are terminologies that are either unique to that industry or if not unique, are used in a way differently than the lay public. And so I have absolutely done everything that you've said. I have quoted people to not in my mind to shame them or to show disapproval, but to say like, well, these are the words that this person used. Right. Now, the question is, could someone look at that and go, well, you just did that because you didn't really believe them, or you wanted to, you were making fun of the way that they talk, which I don't think was true. But some of the words like you mentioned, where you're questioning, I'm looking at some of the examples they put, like, he insists the pain is behind his knee. Well, that's what he said, but by using the word insist, or by using the claim, right? He claims that this medication doesn't work for him. You're implying there that you're not really sure it should work, and why doesn't it work? And it's probably just them. I thought this was something too, again, something that I don't think of, unilateral decisions. So language that doctors use to imply they have authority over the patient. So the patient was told to stop doing X, or I've instructed him to start doing Y. Again, language I would use all the time. Now that we have open notes, right? We've talked about this in the past. Now that patients have the legal right to easily see their notes, they've always had the right to see them, but to easily see them now online, more people are going to be reading their notes, and they're going to see this language, and they're going to, potentially lose some trust or have a more negative view of the doctor or healthcare in general. And it is important to kind of look back at ourselves and understand how others are perceiving what we're writing and making that better if we can, but while still having a medical record that explains what happened and why it happened.
Yeah, so I think the good news is it sort of gives you an opportunity to look back and say, okay, certainly not intent, or at least not in my case, your case, I think in the majority of cases. But I think what's important out of this is we find new ways, because as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about my sort of process of stating, patient states that, stated this, it would have been my process of recording. And part of it is you're trying, in the good old days, bad old days, not sure which, we were handwriting. So there was a big challenge of capturing information. So you grabbed what you could. It was illegible, of course, or at least it was in my case. And we need better ways. Maybe we'll get better with listening in with technology, can then turn it with, some of the speech-enabled solutions. But let's hope they're not programmed with our old inappropriate use of language. So again, I think, interesting place. I'm always open. I just hope people don't judge immediately and have discussions about it versus jumping to conclusions that there was an intent, and it doesn't create that divide. I think that's right. My big desire out of that.
Yep, I agree.
Unfortunately, as usual, we've run out of time. So just remains for me to thank you, as I do each and every month, for joining me for this show. Always a pleasure. Craig, thanks for joining me.
All right. Look forward to the next one.
Thanks for joining me today. Do you have any better ideas, or have you found a small incremental change that's brought about a big improvement in your world? Let's continue the conversation on our hashtag, The Incrementalist, or share with me at DrNick1 on Twitter. You can find more information about the show on our program page at healthcarenowradio.com. And tune in next time to hear my discussions with leaders and innovators from around the globe who've revolutionized their space by using small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and I'm starting a revolution through evolution.